And in this episode, we are going to talk about two aspects of cellular metabolism. So let's go into the energy production and need of the cell, Mr. Panzironi.
Yes, these are two absolutely important aspects, although I have to say very complicated, so we will try this evening to explain them in a very understandable way for our audience. But it is important to understand them because this is where the great misunderstanding exists, the real problem between scholarly medicine and protocol medicine, official medicine, because the biologics tell a different truth than what is then instead interpreted by official medicine, then going on to recommend the wrong foods.
Very well, then I would immediately say, let's go and explain to our viewers how the energy in our cells is produced. We do it with this tutorial.
Every metabolic process of the cell needs energy. So there are cellular energy processes that allow the production of the necessary energy. These are two distinct systems, glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, which are capable of producing ATPs. ATPs are energy-transporting enzymes, and after their hydrolysis to ADP, they release the energy they contain. Glycolysis represents the oldest energy system and is based on the fermentation of glucose molecules in the absence of oxygen. This system is also used by yeast or anaerobic bacteria, and within the cell allows through 10 enzymatic processes to produce from one sugar molecule 2 energetic ATP and 2 pyruvate molecules. The Krebs cycle that takes place within the mitochondria can use either pyruvate or fatty acids as fuel. Both must be converted into acetyl coenzyme A molecules. Pyruvate by oxidative adicarboxylation and fatty acids by beta oxidation. The Krebs cycle produces 18 ATP enzymes for each molecule of acetyl coenzyme A. Glycolysis is a very fast but inefficient process, while the Krebs cycle is very efficient but much slower.
So here we are then, Mr. Panzironi, in a very explanatory way, our video explained in short energy, where we get our energy from with our cells. However, let's start right away by talking about the energy system that uses sugars, glycolysis.
Yes, it is an energy system, the fermentation of sugars, and after 10 enzymatic processes, 2 molecules of pyruvate and 2 energy ATP are produced, which the cell then uses for its needs, after which these 2 pyruvate molecules can be either converted to lactic acid via oxygen and then poured before the matrix, then into the bloodstream, and then return to the liver to become glucose again. Or these 2 pyruvate molecules go within the Krebs cycle that develops within, obviously, the mitochondria to produce the other energy ATPs.
Is just from the Krebs cycle that basically uses acetyl-CoA or acetyl coenzyme A to produce the famous 16 energy ATPs, right?
Right. The Krebs cycle is by far the most efficient energy system because it can produce many more energetic ATPs than glycolysis. But this occurs both with pyruvate that has to be precisely transformed into acetyl coenzyme A, but it also occurs through fats after their beta oxidation.
Mr. Panzironi, you have said several times that official medicine, protocol medicine, makes a mistake on this very aspect that you have just explained to us. However, you cannot just point the finger, you have to tell us why.
Of course, so people from home can understand, well, where is the mistake that is being made today by, let's say, modern dietetics? In short, or by nutritionists. Basically, we know that this sugar, once it enters the cell, is precisely metabolized by glycolysis and then becomes pyruvate and then used in the Krebs cycle to produce other energy. But there are also fatty acids. Fatty acids, once they undergo beta oxidation, are still used within the mitochondrion. So this means producing energy, however, without producing lactic acid, which does occur in the process of glycolysis. The very fact that official medicine believes that the correct diet is sugar is because it thinks there has to be this process consecutive between glycolysis and then after the Krebs cycle, and does not believe instead that there is a direct utilization effect of fatty acids after their beta oxidation. But this we find written in every biology book, so it is not clear why these nutritionists should interpret things completely differently instead.
So, Mr. Panzironi, I believe it is time to air the second tutorial. The one where we go and explain the different requirements by the cell obviously energy differences of the cell. Let's see this tutorial.
Cells have totally different energy needs based on function, but especially on their excitation capacity. In fact, the cells that need the most energy are neurons and muscle fiber cells, which vary the polarization of the membrane, thus enabling the transmission of electrical signals. Non-excitable cells have the ability to vary membrane polarization only to maintain osmolar balance. The tools that allow cells to vary polarization are the sodium-potassium pumps that regulate the escape and entry of sodium and potassium, and thus allow the transport of Na+ ions outside the cell and K+ ions inside it. Excitable cells possess 100 times the number of sodium-potassium pumps of non-excitable cells and require about 12 times the energy needed by a normal cell. For this reason, neurons use glucose as their energy substrate in an exclusive form, while the rest of the cells in the body use fatty acids.
Here, Panzironi, basically the video made us understand that nerve cells have very high energy needs, while all other cells much less.
Yes, this is an absolutely most important distinction, because it is clear that we have cells that produce energy according to their need. So it is no coincidence that we have our brain that weighs only 2% of our entire body, but uses 20% of the energy, precisely because it has a very significant amount of sodium and potassium pumps that allow precisely to get potassium and sodium in and out very quickly. And potassium pumps that allow precisely to make the potassium and sodium go in and out very quickly, and therefore also change the polarity. And doing so generates what is precisely the energy that is needed by precisely the nerve cells. It is clear that a normal cell that does not need all this energy to activate these sodium and potassium pumps, which by the way have much, much less, 1/100th of it, well, it is obvious that it has to use an energy substrate that is more efficient, but certainly not the sugar that activates glycolysis.
Here, just of these sodium and potassium pumps, so basically, if I understand correctly, normal cells have less of them, because therefore they have a lower energy requirement.
Of course, because in normal cells, the sodium and potassium pumps are not to change the cell polarity, but to maintain the balance. So these pumps serve to prevent that there is an output of potassium and an input of sodium, and when that happens, precisely to restore this balance.
Listen though, Panzironi, one thing I can't understand, because then at this point, the non-excitable cells, the ones we call normal, don't need as much energy, right? Because then they should use glycolysis, that is, use the energy that comes from glucose. Since glucose then seems to be the turbocharger of the cell.
This we should ask the nutritionists who keep recommending a carbohydrate-based diet, and a diet that involves 60 to 70% sugar of total calories. It is an excess of energy substrate that only harms us, because we know that 95% of our cells instead use fat, and so we have to give them that as an energy substrate.
One last question, Panzironi. You said that our brain uses 20% of our energy, so I understand that we should therefore take in 20% of our calories in the form of sugar.
Actually, that's not the case. We only need 10% because our body gets its sugars from other sources as well. For example, all the proteins that we eat, about 20% of those we convert through the liver into glucose, but also glycerol, which is that molecule that is regulated, binds fatty acids. Fatty acid is first broken down, and then triglyceride, and then glycerol is sent to the liver, which converts it into sugar. So we go to restore our glucose stores in the liver through protein and through glycerol. Then the liver will be the one to put the glucose we need into the bloodstream.
So thank you to our Adriano Panzironi for this explanation that is so straightforward, so explanatory, and so right.